Michigan 45, Ohio State 23. You know, it's funny because I remember a couple of years ago, back when Michigan was getting dominated in this rivalry, a lot of people were asking the question, what did this program need to do to close the gap between them and Ohio State? And many of us were saying, oh, Jim Harbaugh needs to step up the recruiting. They need to recruit on the level of Ohio State if they ever want to be able to compete with them. And we thought that the gap was just so large that Michigan would never really be able to rebound or close it. And yet, Michigan now is starting to beat down Ohio State. And I realize that in college football, yes, talent does matter, but at the same time, it's not the end-all be-all. You see, the reason why the gap now has closed between these two programs is because of mentality. You see, now Michigan's program has this warlike mentality where they're ready to take you to war, man. They leave it all out on the field. And you saw it in this game. Number 0, the defensive back for Michigan. Bruh, there's no way you can't tell me he didn't leave it all out there. Even if you're a Buckeyes fan, you gotta give credit where credit is due. I hate using this analogy because I feel like it's so weak to describe the outcome of a game. But I'm going to use it. Michigan wanted it more. Be honest. This team was ready to go to war. They were more physical. They were tougher up front. Ohio State, all this year, what has been the consensus knock on them? Oh, they're good, but they're not where they need to be up front. Or they're not as good up front as past Ohio State teams. Joe Klatt has been saying it all year. And I was telling all my friends who are Buckeyes fans, hey, you're going to lose to Michigan. However, I went with Ohio State initially. I changed my mind last minute because news came out that Blake Corum was going to play. Well, I mean, Blake Corum only got 2 carries. Donavon freaking Edwards, man. Forgot all about him. I'm going to be honest. This dude could not be stopped. He was averaging 9.8 yards per carry, people. He was averaging nearly a first down every time he toted the rock. Every time he carried the football, this dude was getting chunk after chunk after chunk. And you know, after the game, they asked CJ Stroud, the quarterback for Ohio State, are you going to potentially play in whatever bowl game Ohio State plays in if this team doesn't make the playoffs? And he said, I don't know. And here everybody goes saying, oh, he's weak. He's quitting on the team. He isn't mentally tough anyway. And I mean, if you're going to question the toughness of CJ Stroud or call it out, I think you probably should call out the toughness of the whole entire Ohio State Buckeyes team. Because in the second half, Michigan just imposed their will on Ohio State. And it's one thing to lose a game 45-40, but it's another to lose a game 45-23 with you only scoring 3 points in the second half, with you getting just blasted up front. Ohio State got manhandled by Michigan. Michigan just couldn't do no wrong in the second half. It was basically Ohio State saying, hey man, listen, we cannot outmatch them up front. So we got to try to beat them on the perimeter. And that's my thing with Ohio State. They're too finesse. We talk about how good they are on the outside, but yet we never talked once about how good they were up front. At least when they were beating, Penn State and whatnot, we were talking about JT and the performance of number 44. But outside of that, many people, their knock on Ohio State has been how good they've been up front. And this Ohio State team has not been as good as previous ones in the past when it comes to being able to win on the line of scrimmage. And the thing with Michigan is that this is a team that, they may not be as impressive as Ohio State when it comes to being able to throw the football. JJ McCarthy threw 3 touchdowns. He completed 12 out of 24 of his passes for 263 passing yards. He had a solid day through the air. Could have been better, but he made some really big throws. You look at CJ Stroud, in the first half he played really well. In the second half, he fell apart. And you definitely cannot put this all on CJ Stroud. You definitely have to look at Ryan Day and question the play calling, because he got out-coached. Jim Harbaugh and his staff put on a coaching clinic in the second half against Ohio State. They just manhandled them up front. The mentality of Ohio State in this game, I definitely feel can be put in question. Because anytime you allow a team to just run the football down your throat, the way Michigan did in the second half, there's a problem. Ohio State all this season was just so good on the perimeter, but they were never really all that great up front. And that comes to show you that football is still won and lost in the trenches. And that's why I went with Michigan to win this game, because I knew that if this game got close, Michigan was going to be able to close this game out, running the football, keeping Ohio State's offense off the field. At least that's how I thought this game would go. I never expected Michigan to boat race Ohio State. This game was close at one point, but man, they just ran Ohio State off the field. Just completely ran them off the field. On the road too. On the road. There were fans who were literally leaving the game. I can't remember the last time I recall fans leaving the game. At least when it was a home game for Ohio State. Michigan as a program is just so far ahead of Ohio State when it comes to mentality. This team really plays like it's their last game. Every single game, even in the games they struggle in. This program has changed. This is not the same Michigan program that you remember from years past. And with recruiting stepping up, especially after a win like this, it's going to continue to step up. Hell, there might be a couple of recruits that decommit from Ohio State and go to Michigan. Shoot, I will. Ohio State, you can say, oh, well, JT, we had so many injuries at running back. Bruh, you're Ohio State, bruh. You recruit at the highest level possible. This is the game. There's no time for, we don't have this guy, we don't have that guy. If Michigan ain't have Blake Corum, which they pretty much didn't, they could have had all the excuses in the world. So, Michigan just looked like the hungrier team. It was ridiculous. I thought that Ohio State's defense, with their new defensive coordinator, actually made some strides. I thought they actually made some improvements. But once again, this is another game that Ohio State lost because they got manhandled up front. This is kind of similar to how I'm gonna go there. Y'all don't like talking about this game, but we're gonna go there. Oregon. You know, we always say, oh, these Pac-12 teams aren't all that physical. Well, last year, you remember when Mario Cristobal and them boys went and manhandled Ohio State up front? That's all Ohio State fans were talking about for the rest of the season in Twitter Spaces, how they got manhandled up front by Oregon. And the same thing happened in this game against Michigan. And a similar situation happened when you nearly lost to Northwestern. Well, I won't say nearly lost, but you got tested against Northwestern. They were getting after you. They were beating you up front. Ohio State used to have such a good run of impact defensive linemen. You had the Bosa brothers to Chase Young. But after that, who has been that guy? Who has it been? Meanwhile, you have Michigan, who's churning them out. Aiden Hutchinson, Dave Djabu. Shoot, they've been turning them out before them. Rashawn Gary. It's a couple of other guys who I can't remember. But Michigan is really starting to separate themselves from Ohio State when it comes to how talented they are up front. And I don't really know the official recruiting rankings per se when it comes to the 5-star and 4-star talent on the defensive and offensive line of Michigan compared to Ohio State's. But I definitely feel like Michigan is starting to pull themselves away talent-wise from Ohio State when it comes to the trenches. Yeah, Ohio State has all these good receivers, but I mean, if you can't block anybody, what's the point? And CJ Stroud, man, like, late in this game, you look for him to make a play. I mean, he disappeared. People, when they talk about the Bryce Young versus CJ Stroud debate, I always go with Bryce Young. If Ohio State had Bryce Young in this game, maybe it's closer. Maybe they win. Because every time Alabama's backs are against the wall, Bryce Young pulls a rabbit out of his hat. I don't know how he does it, but he always finds a way to make a play when you need one the most. And for CJ Stroud, I just never really, throughout his career at Ohio State over the last 2 seasons, never really saw a moment or too many moments where he had that dog in him. At least compared to Bryce Young. How many Heisman moments has CJ Stroud had compared to Bryce Young? Not too many. It seems like Bryce Young has one every single week. I think when it comes to draft time or the NFL draft conversation, when we get close, a lot of people are going to start saying that CJ Stroud is a taxi driver. Meaning that he needs everything around him to be great for him to succeed. Because when things are falling apart, you kind of see what happens. And we saw what happened when things were falling apart for Ohio State tonight. Michigan looked like some Wolverines out there. No pun intended. They left it all out there. JJ McCarthy, I was really impressed with what I saw. And if they were going to win this game, they were going to need him to have this kind of performance. Because the reason why they decided to start him over Cade McNamara was for games like this. Because of the dual threat ability, the arm strength, the push the field. We saw all of that on display. And that's what you need to see going forward as you enter the Big Ten championship and try to push for making it into the college football playoffs. Michigan remains unbeaten, 12-0. Ohio State suffers their first loss of the season. Can Ohio State still make it to the college football playoffs? I will discuss that on another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. Make sure that you check out the podcast. Available on all podcasting platforms, wherever you get your podcast from. Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon. You can find the JT Sports Podcast. If you're listening to this episode on YouTube, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I appreciate you guys for tuning in to this episode of the JT Sports Podcast.